You pick it up from the shelf. The wrapper is the same. The name is the same. The biscuit inside is the same biscuit it has always been. A layer of caramel, a layer of biscuit, a coating that you have called chocolate without ever thinking about whether that word required any justification. It did not used to. You take it to the checkout, you bring it home, you read the back of the packet for the first time in years. The word chocolate is not there. Something else is. The bar did not change. The category beneath it did. The word chocolate has a legal definition in the United Kingdom. It is not a descriptive term left to the discretion of the manufacturer. It is a regulated designation governed by the Cocoa and Chocolate Products, England, Regulations 2003, which set a minimum threshold of 20% total cocoa solids for any product carrying the name. Below that threshold, the product is not chocolate under UK law. It may be a chocolate-flavored coating. It may be a compound coating. It is not chocolate. The distinction is not semantic. It is the difference between a product that meets a defined compositional standard and one that does not. And the labeling on the front of the packet is required to reflect which side of that line the product sits on. That line existed before Pladis crossed it. It existed, and the products that would later cross it, Penguin, Club, Toffee Crisp, Blue Riband, sat comfortably within it for decades. The coating on each of those products contained cocoa butter, the fat derived from the cocoa bean that contributes both to the flavor profile and to the cocoa solids count that determines legal classification. Cocoa butter is expensive. It has always been expensive relative to alternative vegetable fats. For most of the period in which those products were manufactured, the price differential was manageable within a confectionery margin structure designed around it. That structure met a commodity event it was not designed to absorb. Cocoa prices in 2022 sat at approximately $2,400 to $2,600 per metric ton. By the final quarter of 2024, the benchmark price had reached approximately $10,000 per metric ton. That is not a cyclical fluctuation. That is a structural repricing of the raw material on which an entire product category depends. The cause was not speculative. 2 consecutive harvest failures in Ivory Coast and Ghana, which together account for approximately 60% of global cocoa supply, reduced available crop volumes at a moment when global demand for cocoa-containing products was not contracting. The result was a sustained price dislocation that moved through the futures markets and locked in elevated input costs for manufacturers 12 to 18 months before any reformulation appeared on a retail shelf. A manufacturer operating inside that cost environment faces a defined set of options. It can absorb the cost increase within the existing margin structure, which is available to a business prepared to accept a significant reduction in profitability on affected product lines. It can pass the cost increase to the consumer through a higher shelf price, which is available to a business confident that the consumer relationship will survive the price signal. It can reduce the quantity of product sold at the existing price, which is the mechanism that produced the 433 gram to 400 gram reduction in McVitie's Digestives in the same period. Or it can substitute the expensive input for a cheaper one, reformulate the coating, and accept the regulatory consequence that follows from dropping below the legal threshold. Pladis, the global snacks group that owns the McVitie's portfolio, chose the 4th option across 4 of its most recognizable products. The decision was not concealed from the regulatory framework. It was, in that narrow sense, a compliant decision. The formulation changed, the labeling changed to reflect the formulation, and the product reached the shelf in a state that satisfied the requirements of the relevant food standards legislation. What the compliance framework did not require was that Pladis communicate the change to the consumer at the point of selection. The ingredients list was updated. The front of the packet retained the brand name, the familiar design, and the commercial identity that 40 years of chocolate category marketing had built. The cocoa butter was gone. The brand equity it had underwritten remained. Pladis reformulated the coatings on Penguin, Club, Toffee Crisp, and Blue Riband bars. The specific substitution was the replacement of cocoa butter, the fat extracted from the cocoa bean during processing, the component that had historically contributed to each product's position above the legal cocoa solids threshold. With a blend of palm oil and shea oil. Palm oil and shea oil are vegetable fats. They are widely used in food manufacturing as cost-effective alternatives to cocoa butter in coating applications. They do not contain cocoa solids. Their inclusion in the coating formula, in place of cocoa butter, does not move the product toward the 20% threshold. It moves it away from it. The reformulated coating on each of those 4 products does not meet the compositional standard required to carry the designation chocolate under UK retained food law. The consequence of that failure is automatic and is not subject to manufacturer discretion. The product must be labelled accordingly. What that means in practice is visible on the packaging of each affected product. The front of pack description no longer reads chocolate biscuit bar or chocolate coated biscuit. The coating is now designated as a chocolate flavored coating or in some formulations as a compound coating, language that the regulatory framework requires precisely because it signals to the informed reader that the product does not meet the compositional standard the word chocolate would imply. That language appears. It appears in the ingredient declaration and in the product descriptor. It does not appear in the brand name. It does not appear in the size of font the consumer reads at arm's length from the shelf. It appears in the text the consumer reads after purchase if they read it at all. Here is the position Pladis and the broader confectionery industry would advance in response to that description. The reformulation was disclosed. The ingredients list was updated before the product reached retail. No representation was made on the front of the packet that was technically false under the applicable labeling standard. The consumer who wished to verify the compositional status of the coating had the means to do so at the point of purchase. The regulatory requirement was met. The company operated within the framework the law provides. That position is accurate in its account of what the labeling rules require, and incomplete in its account of what the consumer relationship contains. The consumer selecting a Penguin bar from a supermarket shelf is not conducting a compositional audit. They are selecting a product whose identity was established over 4 decades of consistent chocolate category positioning, advertising, packaging language, product naming, and shelf placement that located the product unambiguously within the chocolate biscuit bar category. The expectation embedded in that selection was not formed by reading the ingredient declaration. It was formed by every prior interaction with the product and every prior interaction with the category. The ingredients list is not where that expectation lives. It is not, therefore, where its violation is most legibly recorded. The Digestives reduction sits alongside the reformulation as a parallel instrument applied to the same portfolio in the same period. McVitie's Digestives, also a Pladis product, moved from a 433-gram pack to a 400-gram pack. The reduction is 7.6% of total product quantity. The shelf price did not fall by 7.6%. The mechanism is shrinkflation. The consumer pays the same or a comparable amount for a measurably smaller quantity of product. The change is disclosed in the sense that the weight is printed on the packaging. It is not disclosed in the sense that the consumer at the shelf is performing a weight comparison between the current pack and the pack they purchased 18 months earlier. The information is present. The salience is not. Reformulation and shrinkflation are not the same mechanism. One changes what the product is made of. The other changes how much of it the consumer receives. They are, however, instruments drawn from the same toolkit. The set of responses available to a manufacturer managing input cost pressure without absorbing it in the margin or passing it transparently to the consumer through a price increase. Both instruments reduce the cost of each unit sold. Neither instrument requires the manufacturer to communicate the reduction at the point of sale in terms the consumer will register without active scrutiny. The pattern that connects the Digestives reduction to the coating reformulation is not coincidence of timing. It is consistency of method. Same manufacturer, same period of sustained input cost pressure, same directional outcome. The consumer receives less product, or a product that no longer meets the compositional standard the category name implied, at a price that does not reflect the reduction. The instruments differ. The logic that selected them does not. What the regulatory framework governing both decisions has in common is the same gap. The labeling requirement was satisfied. The consumer communication at the point of selection was not. The Food Standards Agency's rules on cocoa and chocolate labeling did not fail in the Pladis case. They functioned precisely as designed. The regulation requires that a product below the cocoa solids threshold carry a descriptor that reflects its actual composition. Pladis updated the descriptor. The regulation does not require that the manufacturer draw the consumer's attention to the change at the shelf, in advertising, or in any communication directed at the existing customer base. The gap between what the regulation requires and what the consumer would need to know to make an informed comparison purchase is not an enforcement failure. It is a design feature of a labeling framework, built around compositional accuracy, rather than consumer comprehension at the point of decision. That distinction is the coldest part of this story. The regulation that protected the word chocolate is the same regulation that produced the new label. The consumer did not lose the protection the regulation provides. They lost the product the protection was designed to describe. The framework worked. The 40-year-old expectation embedded in the brand name was not within the framework's scope to protect. You are back at the shelf. The penguin bar is in your hand. The price is within the range you remember. The wrapper carries the name it has always carried. The design iteration currently in circulation, the brand identity that decades of consistent category placement established without requiring you to read the small print. You did not read the small print then. You are reading it now. The coating is not chocolate. It meets the compositional requirement for a chocolate-flavored compound coating, which is a different thing, governed by a different descriptor, positioned in a different legal category. A category that exists specifically for products that resemble chocolate in application and appearance, but do not meet the threshold that would allow them to carry the name. The argument Pladis would advance at this point is the argument the industry advances consistently in response to reformulation scrutiny. The ingredients are disclosed, the labeling is compliant, the consumer retains full information before completing the purchase, and no representation on the front of the packet was technically false under the applicable standard. That argument is accurate in its reading of what the labeling framework requires. It is incomplete in its reading of what the consumer was purchasing when they selected this product from this shelf for the 40th time without reading the ingredient declaration, because the ingredient declaration had never previously contained information that changed the answer to the question of what they were holding. The consumer was not purchasing a specific fat phase composition. They were not purchasing a cocoa solids percentage. They were purchasing what the brand had meant inside the chocolate biscuit bar category for the entirety of the period in which they had been buying it. The premium, such as it exists in a biscuit bar at this price point, was attached to that meaning. The reformulation did not add a charge. It removed the substance the charge had always implied was present. Three facts point in the same direction. The legal threshold for chocolate was not met by the reformulated coating. The decision to substitute cocoa butter with palm and shea oil was a documented commercial response to a structural commodity price event. The same manufacturer applied a parallel cost reduction instrument to a second product line in the same period. The probability that those three facts are unrelated, that the Reformulation was a quality decision, that the shrinkflation was a packaging decision, that the timing was incidental. Is not a matter on which reasonable interpretation divides. That is not a reformulation. That is a substitution, with a legacy name retained.